Hi everyone, this is Dr. Shweta and today we are going to cover the period of medieval English history. So let's begin. The medieval time period, that is the time period before Chaucer, spanned from 5 AD to 13 AD. What comes to mind when we talk about the Medieval Ages? For many people, it is the huge castles, knights, superstitions, and a general ignorance, or what we might call the intellectual darkness. In fact, the Middle Ages have often been called the Dark Ages because of this lack of intellectual vibrancy. People were not aware of the things around them, and this lack of knowledge is the reason that this period is termed as the Dark Ages. It was the time period which was deeply rooted in superstitions and many kinds of myths. So, Middle Ages or the medieval time period lasted from the fall of Roman Empire in 5th century AD to the birth of the modern age beginning around the 15th or 16th century when England saw the arrival of Renaissance. So let us begin with the socio-political conditions in England during medieval period. Throughout the Middle Ages, the influence of the Catholic Church was dominant. The church held more power than kings. Corruption in the Catholic Church was very common. However, the church had the power to levy taxes on people many a time. Gothic architecture dominated during this time, like the pointed roof castles and secret walls inside them, and the structure like that. Another important development of the Middle Ages is the rise of Islam in Europe, which threatened Christianity. So, Pope declared war against these Muslims, which were called as Crusades. These Crusades started from 11th century and continued until 13th century. What were the economic conditions of common people in the Middle Ages? Let's get to know. The average person living during the Middle Age had a very poor quality of life. There was feudalism or feudal system in England where the king had complete ownership of the entire land and he distributed it to the nobles, and nobles then further employed serfs or laborers to work on it for some wages, food and shelter. The medieval period was also affected by Black Death, a kind of bubonic plague which wiped out almost one third of the entire population of Europe. The plague came in Europe between the years 1346 to 1353. We divide medieval period into two parts, Anglo-Saxon period and Anglo-Norman period. So let us first discuss the Anglo-Saxon period. Anglo-Saxon period started from 410 AD to 1066 AD. That means from 5th century to 11th century is the period which we usually call as the Anglo-Saxon period, just after the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, after all the Romans began leaving England, the invaders from the east began to attack England. These invaders were the Germanic tribes, majorly comprising of Angles, Saxons and Jutes. By the year 500 CE, the Anglo-Saxons had invaded most parts of Britain. These people came from North Germany and Denmark. Whereas the native people of England, who were known as Celts or Britons, who were pushed towards Scotland and Wales by these Anglo-Saxon tribes. The language spoken by the Angles and Saxons is considered as the Old English because it is the oldest variant of the English language. But these people didn't have a written language, so they used to sing their poetry and shared it with each other orally. All the literature of this period that we know today has been later recorded by monks who came to England to Christianize these tribal people in 6th century AD. So we must remember here that the Christianization of England started in 6th century AD. Then later on, around 8th century AD, another tribe known as the Vikings attacked and raided England. These raiders looted the monasteries of the monks because they knew that they will find anything of any merit and value only in these monasteries. And when they raided these places, they also destroyed much of the literature that those monks had previously recorded. But still, some of it was saved and it was later compiled and recorded again by the greatest and the first Anglo-Saxon king, Alfred the Great, who not only saved the remaining literature but also unified the Anglo-Saxon people. The Vikings finally left England around 11th century AD when the Anglo-Saxon period finally ended and the Anglo-Norman period started. But before proceeding to Anglo-Norman period and its history, let us first consider the important Anglo-Saxon literature which is of importance or value to us as students of English literature. Many famous poets came out of this school like Bede, Sinwulf and Caedmon. The first is Bede or Venerable Bede, who wrote the ecclesiastical history of the English people, which was in Latin, as Latin was the language of the educated religious people. The important thing to note here is that the language used by common people back then was Old English, whereas the educated masses like the monks, nobles and royalty spoke and wrote in Latin language. It was gradually that English language became the proper language used in speaking as well as writing much later. The second poet of the Anglo-Saxon period was Caedmon, who wrote many poems like Paraphrase and Judith. Both of these were religious as well as heroic in nature, since Anglo-Saxons were originally seafarers or people who traveled a lot via sea, and so heroism is major theme in their poetry. These people were very heroic, very courageous and very brave. So major themes of their poetry is always about bravery. Another important poet in the Anglo-Saxon period was Sinwulf. Sinwulf wrote a few remarkable poems like The Christ, Juliana, The Fate of Apostles and Eileen. There are a few more poems which are believed to be written by him, but not with any surety or with any proof. For example, Andreas the Phoenix, Dream of the Rood, Descent into Hell, Guthlac, Wanderer. There are many more heroic poems that belong to the period of Anglo-Saxon, but the authorship of these poems is still not known. But it is also important for us to remember the names of these other heroic poems, and these are Widsith, Dior or Dior's Lament, The Seafarer, The Fight at Finnsburg, Voltaire, Beowulf, etc. The Beowulf is the most well-known of them all, and it is in three parts. The central character is Beowulf himself, and the poem talks about the adventures of the hero on various far-off islands. It is a heroic poem. The authorship of all these texts above is not known by anyone, and we are not aware who wrote them. Lastly, the two most important heroic poems written close to the end of Anglo-Saxon period are the Battle of Burnaby and the Battle of Malden. These poems talk about the victory of Anglo-Saxons over the Danes or the Vikings when they came and attacked England around 8th century. The Anglo-Saxon period is not all about the heroic poetry. There were also some religious poems sung and recorded during this time, which specially depicted Christianity as a major religion. Now these poems were Genesis, Exodus, Daniel, Christ and Satan, etc. All these poems talk about the beginning of mankind, the creation of earth, the fall of man from heaven, the fall of Satan, the harrowing of hell, etc. So with this, we end the Anglo-Saxon division of the medieval time period, and we begin with the Anglo-Norman period, which started from 1066, that is 11th century, and lasted up to 13th century.